Hi friends, we're back on skills, and today we're going to be talking about tracking and redirecting of cognitive events. These are two pretty closely related skills and skills that are practiced together, so we're going to fit them both in one video hopefully here. And they're skills that relate to how we engage constructively with the manner in which thoughts happen. And I actually got that in one go. I'm very excited about that because it's tricky language, is tongue twister. And it's very specific language because I'm not interested in talking about how you think. I'm interested in talking about how thoughts happen to you, which sort of engages with something that people really, I find, have a lot of trouble with and probably have a fair bit of skepticism about. Healthy skepticism. We like skepticism. So I'm going to make a claim, which is that that sort of Cartesian I think that folks tend to get pretty hung up on is dead wrong. It's just a blatant misunderstanding of the facts of human cognition. And a better formulation for that same sort of experience would be thoughts happen, I experience thought. So it sort of takes the person out of the driver's seat. And it explains a lot of things, like how are intrusive thoughts possible if I'm the person thinking, right? How can I have a thought in my head that I don't want to have? If I have this model where it's I think, therefore I am, I'm in the driver's seat, I'm generating thought, right? The human person, right, the locus of observation is not a thought generator, it's a thought perceiver. And that's a really important distinction to make because while we have some influence, we have some ability to direct the channels of our cognitive events, what we don't have is the ability to control, to generate, to have sort of complete authorship over our cognitive events, our cognitive experiences. So these skills of tracking, actually being able to follow in a fine-grained way what's going on in my mind, and then redirecting to actually choose a different allocation of our cognitive resources so that we can build up a different experience are very fundamental, and you don't have an incentive to even look for them, let alone practice them, if you're stuck in this idea of I think. So that's what this one's about. Now, since I'm out here making a claim, I gotta prove a claim, right? I should offer some evidence. And this is a really handy one because it's really, really easy to prove. And it's very simple. You just play a little game. It's really a meditative exercise, but you can just frame it as a game. So you find yourself a nice quiet space, and you don't have to find yourself a quiet space. The game's easier to play if you find yourself a quiet space. And ideally, a comfortable environment, and you just count your breaths. And that's all you're doing, is just counting your breaths. And so you're going to count 1, right? In, out, 1. 2, and so on until you get to 10. And when you get to 10, if you should ever get to 10, you start over. There's another condition on which you got to start over, and that's if you find yourself thinking about anything other than the counting of breaths. So if you have any sort of cognition other than 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, you start over. All right? I love this game because I tell people about it, and some people even go and try it. And invariably, they start out very confident, like this is stupid. I can definitely count to 10. This is not a problem. It's that second little bit, right? The starting over when you notice that you're thinking about something other than counting, that introduces the difficulty. And, you know, a lot of people find that they're surprised to discover they can't really get past 2, 3 if they're really on a good run before some other chain of thought has wrested their resources away from this business of counting breaths and taken them off on some journey of cognitive activity that has nothing to do with what they set out to do. And so it really very quickly undermines this notion that one is the author of one's cognitive experience. It's definitely not a matter of I think. Thoughts are happening really whether you want them to or not. And that's really important to understand if we're going to be able to have any influence over what thoughts happen and what sort of experiences all of that cognitive activity is building for us. So, how does this relate? What are we really practicing here? When we're playing this game, we need to understand what the goal is. The goal is not to get to 10. That's just part of the structure. If you get to 10, like, yeah, cool, rad, throw a little party, have a little, timeout, do a little celebrating, right? That was my celebration dance. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. And then start over, because the actual goal of this exercise is to, 1, prove to yourself that I think is a myth, and 2, practice those 2 skills of tracking what's going on and then redirecting our allocation of cognitive resources, our focus, back towards what it is we actually intended to be doing. So every time you discover that you get distracted, that's a cause for celebration, because that's actually your mind generating an opportunity for you to go, I've noticed something. I'm tracking what's going on. Allow me to redirect right back to my counting of breaths, right? So every single time you become distracted, and your mind will happily offer up countless opportunities to have that experience, you're actually getting a chance then to practice developing these skills of tracking the succession of states in a more fine-grained way than you're used to, of noticing when that succession of states has deviated from your volitional, intentional allocation of your focus or your cognitive resources, and then redirecting, going, hey, nope. I'm putting myself in the driver's seat, and come back to your intended cognitive activity. And so this is a wonderful exercise. It's a challenging exercise in that it's very easy to slip into frustration about not being able to get past 2. It's very easy to slip into sort of cheating and going, oh, well, but that thought happened, but it doesn't actually count. None of which serve your well-being in the long run, because you're not practicing the skill, right? You want distraction to happen because that allows you to notice it, and there we are tracking, and then come back from distraction. Now, most human beings go about most of their life fully distracted. They have some intentions, and then their mind just kind of goes off. A ton of thought happens that they had no volitional portion. We've lost it. A ton of thought happens where they've had no role in authoring it. It's not a volitional process. It's just going, and they're along for the ride. And people can live long stretches of their life in that, where just whatever cognition arises and seizes the reins is allowed to just do its thing. And often that leads to unfortunate consequences, because those cognitive events can be arising from conditioned patterns of behavior that don't serve our well-being, and we can find ourselves doing all sorts of things that we don't intend in a meaningful way. They're not what we would author if we were making a conscious choice, but they're just the inertia of our mind. And so we can spend so long being distracted and acting in the world without ever noticing it. So we practice this skill of recognizing distractions by creating this little artificial environment of the game. And then we practice redirecting to get ourselves back into sort of the driver's seat, back into a position of actually authoring something of our experience. So those are 2 skills. Tracking what is going on in a more fine-grained way in the succession of mental states, right? What sort of cognitive events are going into forming the state right now, and how does that relate to the state that came before and the state that's coming in the next moment? And when we find that has deviated from the intention that we have set, we'll just bring it back, get ourselves back on track. And take the time to throw a little party for ourselves, like, yeah, look at that, we got distracted and we came back, because the goal is not to not become distracted. We're not trying to make it to 10. The goal is to recognize that distraction has occurred as quickly as possible and recover from distraction as quickly as possible and get to a point where that recognition and recovery cycle gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, so that instead of spending minutes, hours, days, weeks in this sort of autopilot distracted state, we spend a few moments and then go, oh, wait a second, back on track. And as you develop those skills, you're going to have more and more and more ability to effectively, consistently intervene in the succession of thoughts which are happening to you, and have a greater and greater degree of authorship over your own experience. And that's going to give you sort of the fundamental cognitive skills to start choosing to author a happier human experience.